What's up, everybody? It's Dakota, and today we had two different banned and restricted announcements. Of course, one for modern, standard, legacy, vintage, all those great formats, and the Pioneer banned and restricted announcement also happened later after this change or lack of change was announced. And the reason why we're going over the standard, modern, legacy, vintage, banned and restricted announcement when there is no cards that were actually banned or unbanned or restricted in any of those formats. It comes from the actual banned and restricted like notes part of the announcement, which is them basically like getting rid of planned exact dates of when banned and restricted announcements are going to happen. And I will link this specific BNR and the Pioneer one too. That'd be more fair. I'll link both of the articles in the description of this video. But essentially, what this is saying is that it's going to be getting rid of the banned and restricted dates completely, and that all the banned and restricted announcements from now on in any format, whether it's Pioneer, Modern, Legacy, Vintage, Standard, whatever, is all going to be on one announcement, and it's all going to be on Mondays. There's just not going to be a specific date as when those announcements are going to take place. And while I think this looks like in the short term a bad thing for like the players, especially like the competitive players, because you could be expecting to play Tron on an open or at a Magic Fest coming up, and then they ban like Urza's Tower or they ban Karn the Great Creator, something like that. And now you have to figure out a completely different deck or figure out like changes that you can make to the deck so you can at least make it playable, things like that. That just being an example. So while it sounds bad in the short term, I think in the long term, for in terms of like the growth of the game and how big it is now and how big Wizards wants it to be and everything else, I think this is actually going to be a positive thing moving forward. Also, without a set date, we won't have emergency bannings because like they could still do that before. Like they could essentially like ban or unban something at any time if they wanted to. Just now without there being a BNR announcement or official date, excuse me, for BNR announcements, we can see changes more often when they're needed, with everything involving like Oko and the Mythic Championship 6, I believe, which was the standard Mythic Championship. We could have seen like Oko get banned before, like emergency banned is what people wanted, but if they didn't have like a set date for the BNR, that could have been a thing that happened where they did it like 2 or 3 weeks before the Mythic Championship instead of people wanting them to do it a week before the Mythic Championship. So it's pretty interesting. Everything that's going on and everything that's happening with Magic now. It's a very interesting like way to essentially end 2019 in terms of Magic and design and everything. That could be its whole video. But essentially, this is what the BNR is going over, or the notes rather, for this particular article. I'll link it again in the description so you can read exactly, but the next update will likely be in January, and it's going to be on a Monday. So you got about, I think, 4 or 5 dates to pick from in January when it possibly could happen. So that's just something to be aware of as we move forward in the crazy game that we call Magic the Gathering. So the next one and the actual BNR that actually banned something was Pioneer, which is Oko, Thief of Crowns, banning basically everything else except for Legacy, I think, at this point. I believe it's like, and Modern. So like Oko's still legal, Legacy, Modern, and in Vintage. And Nexus of Fate, also banned in Pioneer. So how do we feel about these? It's kind of funny too that they have a. I just realized this. They actually have a date for the Pioneer announcement. So I'd imagine, because it says in this article too that the Pioneer ban list is going to line up with the traditional BNR or with the rest of the BNR. So we could just see a ban and restricted announcement come like essentially that first Monday in January, which is going to be pretty funny that they were trying to keep it mysterious, but then like if they just have like an in general like ban and restricted announcement on January 6th, this article kind of just like spoiled when it could possibly happen. So anyway, going back to the cards that were banned, Oko Thief of Crowns, very dominating card, was banned in his or suspended in Historic, banned in Standard, It's banned in Pioneer now. People are calling for it to get banned in Modern and Legacy and in Vintage. I'm assuming that people want it restricted. I mean, it did turn a Black Lotus into a creature to win the game, you know. And then Nexus of Fate, I feel like it says down here that like Simic Nexus has the second highest win rate and a number of 5-0 league finishes among top decks. And Simic Ramp was one of the Simic Nexus's only unfavorable matchups among the top decks. It took the additional step in banning Nexus of Fate. The potential for Nexus of Fate decks to lead to frustrating play patterns and long matches is an additional factor in this decision, which of course I think was like just ultimately what banning of Nexus of Fate was. Like, sure, it has a number of 5-0s. Its unfavorable matchup is against Simic Food and like these Simic ramp decks or whatever. And banning Oko would obviously hinder these decks greatly. With that being said, like Nexus is just a terrible card to play against. As someone who's played it a ton in Standard and has top aided with it, has won events with Nexus of Fate, like the card is super frustrating to play against, and even like not playing with, like if you're not playing with it, like playing against it, like I've played it for the duration of the time it was in Standard before it got banned, and then of course, or not even really banned in Standard, but like when it got banned in best of ones, and when people were just really tired and just done with like this card being a thing, it's frustrating when you're on the other side of it, and after a while it stops being fun when you're the person doing it, because yeah, you're winning, but like you're taking these like arbitrary like game steps. They like you don't even have like something to necessarily like help you win. Like the old win conditions like that I saw used to be like Dawn of Hope, just to make tokens, and like that was like the fastest way that like, or at least the most fun way to like win the game, if it wasn't like Teferi Emblem, exile all your opponent's permanents, things like that. So Nexus of Fate, definitely a quality of life band to me. I'm sure it was very powerful. I'm sure the deck was really good, but definitely quality of life was taken into account when banning this card, and that's totally fine. This card probably should have never existed anyway. Oko is a pretty big offender, from very innocuous Planeswalker, I think, when it was spoiled, to like probably the best Planeswalker printed, period. Banned in Standard because it was too powerful. Getting suspended in Historic because it's too powerful. Getting banned in Pioneer, just another list of achievements Oko has racked up in its very short time being printed in 2019. And going into 2020, I would expect by this time next year Oko is essentially just banned in all playable, or banned in all formats and restricted in Vintage. I would not be surprised if that was the case. If it was like legal in Legacy or something like that, I think I'd be fine with it. But I don't see this card like living in Modern and living in Legacy through the end of 2020. I would say by the end of next year, this card's going to basically be banned and everything playable, and then it's just going to be left as like a one of in Legacy, or maybe even still just totally legal in Vintage or something. Maybe that's fine. I'm not exactly sure, but this card is busted in half. Probably one of the biggest mistakes from 2019, in a set that was like filled with cards that just like do a lot of things and have really shaped Magic in 2019, even though the set came out in like September or something. Like it felt like it came out like forever ago, and like we've only had it for like a few months, which is just crazy to me. And then of course like the different data and everything that they have going over said cards that got banned, and the effective date is going to be tomorrow for Tabletop Magic Online, as they've been doing for the last few announcements when they've actually banned things. And that's going to do it for the BNR for the last BNR for 2019. It's been a crazy year, and it's been an even crazier like end of the year with everything that's been going on with Magic. And while I don't think it ended on a particularly high note in terms of like the health of formats, I mean, Standard died there for a little bit. People were really getting tired of Modern, even though Modern was still definitely a diverse format. Legacy apparently being kind of miserable, and then like they banned the miserable card they wanted them to ban, and then people said the format's still miserable. I'm not exactly sure like what the heck's going on there, but like this is why I mainly try to stay away from Legacy, because it's a weird world out there, and I just try not to get involved in it. But that's gonna do it for this this last BNR that we can expect for 2019. From the looks of it, with the Pioneer, we're done with just BNRs completely. So if you enjoyed the video and want to be more informed about some of these sweet formats, check out some more of my videos. I go over like a few modern decks. I know I have a few Pioneer deck techs. The standard deck techs are probably pretty old, but be on the lookout for some sweet new standard decks that are going to be coming out towards like the end of the standard cycle, and then going into like Theros Beyond Death, which is going to be sweet from the few cards that we already had spoiled. I look forward to some pretty sweet new archetypes being birthed from the release of that set. But anyway, that's gonna do it for me and this video. Be sure to check me out on the next one as I go over some sweet new modern stuff and kind of go over the state of modern on a video that's going to be going up probably later this week. I'm gonna say like I'm gonna shoot for Wednesday for that video to go up. But yeah, that's gonna do it for me here, and I'll see you guys in the next video.